Okay, so this new unit we're starting is over quadratics, which we introduced the last unit, but we looked at factoring quadratics. So this time we're going to start by re-looking at the quadratic formula, but y'all should already know how to do it, so we're just going to touch on it just to make sure we still understand what to do. So starting with the quadratic formula, okay, let's just review what that was. Make sure that your equation is in standard form, so that's with the x squared term first, and then the x, and then your constant, and all equal to 0. Okay, and then the quadratic formula, which is on a formula chart, is x equals the opposite of b. Make sure that you know that that means the opposite, and don't always think about it as negative. Think about it as the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, and one of the other things you want to remember is that anytime you plug in a number for a variable, make sure you put it in parentheses or you might mess it up. All right, so let's look at this problem. Solve 2x squared minus 5 equals 3x. Okay, so we definitely cannot even think about factoring this yet until we get it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract the 3x and move it to the other side. So we have 2x squared minus 3x minus 5 equal to 0. So make sure when you rewrite it that you write it in that standard form. So that minus 3x is going to go in the middle. Now normally what we would do is we would go ahead and factor this, find factors that multiply to be negative 10 and add to be negative 3. Which there are factors that do that, but just for the sake of going over the quadratic formula, we're going to work it using quadratic formula. So what I want to do is go ahead and say what my A is, what my B is, and what my C is. Okay, and my A is going to be the number that is in front of my x squared, which is 2. So A is 2. My B is going to be what's in front of x, which is my negative 3. And my C is going to be the constant, the number by itself, which is minus a negative 5. Okay, so now I just start plugging this into my formula. So I'm going to start with x equals the opposite of b. And we said that my b was negative 3. So the opposite of that would be 3, plus or minus the square root. Now remember, anytime you plug something in, plug it in parentheses. So I have a negative 3 squared, that's my b, minus 4 times my a is 2, and times my c, which is negative 5. And that's all going to go over 2 times my a, which is 2. Now the benefit of writing it all out like this is that we can just type it in our calculator exactly like it looks. So we talked about last unit on the trick to put this in the calculator. So you remember you push alpha, y equals, and this little window comes up. And you can either press 1 or enter to get your fraction popped up. Okay, so now I'm just going to start plugging everything in that I wrote down. And I'm going to do the plus first, because we're going to have 2 answers. So I have 3 plus the square root, so I'll have to hit second, the x squared button. Okay, and then everything else I type in exactly like it looks. So negative 3 squared, that goes in parentheses. Okay, make sure you only come out of the exponent once with your right arrow, so you don't come out of the square root because we still want to be underneath it. Minus 4 times 2 times negative 5. And then I'm just going to use my arrows to get down to the bottom of the fraction to where I'm going to type in 2 times 2 and press enter. Okay, so my first answer is 5 over 2. Okay, so I now know that x is equal to 5 over 2, but that's when I've done the plus part of the quadratic formula. Now I need to do the minus. And there's another little trick that you can do. You can scroll up to where you typed the quadratic formula in before, press enter. Use your arrows and get up to where the plus sign is. And then what you can do is you can just type over it. You don't have to clear it. You don't have to delete it. Just just get on top of the plus sign, change it to a minus, hit enter, and there's our other answer. So our other answer here is -1. Okay, and we're going to talk about a little bit more in here in a second that those are our x-intercepts for our parabola. Okay, I'm going to do one more quadratic formula problem, and then I think we're going to be good with those. So let's look at this problem. I have 2x squared plus x equals 3. Okay, remember we need it equal to 0 before we do any factoring. So I have 2x squared plus x minus 3 all equal to 0. Okay, and normally I would go ahead and factor this and say what multiplies to be -6 and adds to be 1. And there are factors that do that, but since we're going through the quadratic formula right now, I just want to go ahead and use that. Okay, so my a here is 2, my b is 1, and my c is -3. And then I'm going to start plugging this back into that formula. Okay, so I will have the opposite of b. My b is 1, so the opposite of that would be -1, plus or minus the square root. I'm going to plug my b in, which is 1 squared minus 4 times my a, which is 2, times my c, which is -3, all over 2 times a, which is 2. Okay, and I'm going to go back to my calculator and do exactly what I did on the last problem. So remember the trick, you hit alpha, y equals, enter. And I'm going to type this in exactly like I wrote it. So the opposite of 1, so -1. Okay, and then plus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times my a, which was 2, times my c, which was -3. And then use my arrows to get down to the bottom, all over 2 times 2, and that gets me 1. Okay, so my first answer is x equals 1, but I need to get the other answer. So I'm going to use my arrows and highlight what I typed in before. Press enter, and then I'm going to use my arrows to go in and find the plus sign, and I'm going to change it to a minus. So I get to the plus, I just type over it, change it to minus, and I get -3 over 2. And so those are my two solutions here. Remember, solutions are the same thing as roots, the same thing as zeros, and the same thing as x-intercepts. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so let's talk about the solutions that we talked about whenever we went through factoring in the last unit. Okay, and this says how many solutions can we have for a quadratic. Okay, and I just talked about what a solution is. Remember, a solution is your x-intercepts. Okay, and I know on a lot of the problems that we've been factoring, I know that a lot of the times we get 2 answers, but there's a chance that we might get 1 answer, and there's a chance that there might not be a solution. Okay, so let's talk about each one of these graphs really quick. So if we have 1 solution, that means it's crossing the x-axis once. Okay, so just right here, our parabola, remember this is called a parabola. Either looks like a U or an N. Okay, it's crossing the x-axis once, so that's our 1 solution. If we look at the 2 solutions, that means it's crossing the x-axis twice. Okay, and then remember, a solution is where it crosses the x-axis. So if we have this parabola on the 3rd graph that never crosses the x-axis, then there is no real solution. Okay, that graph could look many different ways. It could look like this. It could be upside down. But if it doesn't ever cross the x-axis, then there are no real solutions. Okay, and there's 2 ways that we've talked about to solve quadratics. Okay, the first thing that we talked about in this last unit that we just tested on was factoring. Okay, so that's the first way that we've learned to find solutions and to solve a quadratic. And the other way that we looked at was the quadratic formula. Okay, and remember that you don't want to use the quadratic formula every time. We used it on a couple of problems that we just went over that we didn't necessarily have to use it on, but only use it in situations that you really need to. Okay, so we've talked about factoring, we've talked about quadratic formula. What we're going to bring in today is how you can solve by graphing. Okay, and we're going to show you ways to do this in the calculator by graphing. Okay, and you won't normally have to know how to graph by hand, but you need to know how to sketch it. Okay, which means you need to know how to find a few different points. We're going to look at next time how to find the vertex and all of that, so that you'll learn a few more ways to graph next time. Okay, so we know that this cannot be factored until it is equal to 0, so I need to add the 8 to both sides. So I have a negative x squared plus 2x plus 8 equal to 0. Remember, you want that to be in standard form. Now, I know in my classes I've talked about that the x squared term, before we factor, we need for that to be positive. Okay, when we're solving by graphing, it doesn't matter. So we can actually just leave it that way. Okay, now I've printed off a way for you, the steps on how to punch all this stuff into the calculator. I'm going to go over a couple of these, but you will be able to see how to do these in the calculator. So let me just show you real quick kind of a simple way to find a few points that you could graph on this graph in front of us. Okay, here's what I would do. I would go to my y equals, and I would type in the equation that we have. So negative x squared plus 2x plus 8. Okay, and you could either graph it, but that's not really going to get you the specific points that you're going to want. And you can see over here on my graph that you can already kind of see a sketch of it. But if I want to see specific points, I want to go to my table. So I hit second graph. And here I can see some specific points like 0, 8, 1, 9, 2, 8, 3, 5. So I'm just going to pick maybe those first 3 to graph. But we could, maybe I'll scroll up one more so I can see this one. Okay, but you can see negative 1, 5, 0, 8, 1, 9. Okay, so I'm going to go through and I'm going to graph these and just sketch this graph. Okay, because you will have to do problems like this. Okay, so my first point was negative 1, 5, and I'm going to go up one more to negative 2 because that gets me my 0. That's a little easier to graph. Okay, so I'm going to first start at negative 2, 0. Okay, that's actually my 0 here. That's my x-intercept. And then I have negative 1, 5, which is right there. Okay, I also have 0, 8. I have 1, 9. I have 2, 8, I have 3, 5, and then I have 4, 0. And you can see that we have just sketched a parabola, all by just typing that in the y equals, going to our table, and finding some specific points. Okay, so you can see right here that our x-intercepts, or our solutions, or our roots, okay, those all mean the same thing, our zeros. So you can see that our roots here are at x equals negative 2 and at x equal to 4. Okay, now if I wanted to write those as an ordered pair, which is not always necessary, but just in case, we know it would be negative 2, 0, and 4, 0. Okay, and that's if we were to sketch it by hand. Okay, but what I'm going to show you now is how to get these answers by graphing in the calculator instead of graphing by hand. Okay, so let's all look at this problem. X squared minus 4x equals negative 4. We know we can't do anything until we move the 4 over. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So that gives me x squared minus 4x plus 4 now equal to 0. Okay, so what we're going to do, and we talked about this the other day, now that it's all equal to 0, or all equal, kind of like equal to y, I'm going to go to my y equals, and I'm going to type this in. Okay, so we have x squared minus 4x plus 4. All right, we get that all in there, and what we want to do is press graph. And we see a picture of this. Okay, so right away we look at this and let's decide how many solutions it looks like we have. Now, we could zoom in a little bit and see this a little bit more exact, but right now it looks like we have one solution because it's only crossing the x-axis once. Okay, so we'll see whenever we go through this if that's what we get or not. Okay, so after we've graphed it, okay, I'm going to hit second trace. We've used this button before when we wanted to find the intersection. Okay, but this time I want to find the zeros. So I'm going to press number 2. Okay, and what's going to come up first is it says left bound. That means you want to find where your 0 is. Okay, in this case we just have 1. And if your cursor is not already to the left of that point, you want to get it to the left of that point. Ours just happened to be when it came up, it's already to the left. Okay, so I'm going to press enter, and it puts a little point there. Okay, and then I need to do the right bound. So I'm going to use my right arrow. You can see my point moving. It does not matter where you get that on the right side. It doesn't have to be even with the other one. It just needs to be to the right of your 0. You press enter, and we want to press enter one more time to get what our 0 is. Okay, and you can see here that it's 1.9999999. So if we were to round that, it's actually going to be at x equals 2. Okay, if there was another 0, if there were 2 spots where it crosses the x-axis, we would do that all over again. But since it only crosses it once here, then that's all we need to do. Okay, because let's think about this. If we factored this last unit, we would have ended up 2 factors that multiply to be 4 and add to be negative 4. That would be x minus 2 and x minus 2. If I set both of those equal to 0, I get x equals 2, which is exactly what the calculator told me that the 0 is. Okay, let's try another one. All right, we have x squared plus 8 equals 2x, and we're going to solve this again by graphing. So I need to get that 2x to the other side, so I'm going to subtract it. So now I have x squared minus 2x plus 8 equal to 0. Okay, now that I have it this way, I can find my zeros in the calculator. So I'm going to go to my y equals. I'm going to type my new equation in. So x squared minus 2x plus 8. And then I hit graph. Okay, so you can see here that it doesn't ever cross the x-axis, which means we don't want to go in and calculate the solutions because there are no solutions. So this one's kind of an exception here. Okay, we actually end up having no solutions to this problem. Okay, it never crosses the x-axis, therefore it doesn't have a solution. Okay, let's do another one. Okay, so this is just for practice, so I'll just do this one too. So I've got x squared. Now I have to move my 5x to the other side. So I have x squared plus 5x minus 6 equal to 0. And I'm going to type this in my y equals. So I have y equals x squared. Oops, forgot to clear that out. So x squared plus 5x minus 6. I hit graph. Okay, now I wanted to do this one because this is an instance where it does cross the x-axis twice, which means we're going to have to calculate two different zeros. And we can't do it at the same time. We're going to have to do it at two separate times. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I need to calculate the zero. So I'm going to go second calc. I'm going to pause this so I can answer the phone. Okay, sorry about that. So let's finish up this problem. So we had already typed this in our calculator, and we were starting to find the zeros. Okay, so I'm going to hit second trace. I'm already there. And I'm going to hit number 2 for zeros. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the left point first. So the one that looks like it's going through -6. I don't know that it's going through -6 for sure, but I am going to take my cursor and I'm going to get to the left of that point. So just keep moving your cursor until you get it to the left of it. Okay? So don't think above it, don't think below it, think to the left. So I'm going to press enter when I get it to the left of that, and then I'm going to go to the right of it and hit enter, and I'm going to hit enter again, and it is actually at -6. So x equals -6 is my first answer. Okay, to get the other zero, you have to do that process again. You can't just start up from where you are right now. So if you hit second trace, we want 0. Okay, I need to do the left bound, but this time of my other zero. So I'm going to use my cursor and get it to the left. So you'll start to see it come up. It just needs to be somewhere on the left. So enter there. Then we do the right bound. And I enter there. And I enter one more time. And it gives me that my 0 is 1. Okay, so my two solutions here, since it crosses twice, are -6 and 1. Okay, now there's one other thing that I want to talk about, and then we'll be done. If you ever get a problem and it tells you that, hold on, I'm going to scroll back just to get I'm just going to write it here. If you ever have something to where it says you have -1 e to the -12, okay? And you'll know what I'm talking about when you see it, okay? But all I want you to know here is that this means 0. So if you see that, so let me just give you an example. If I was given a 0 or an x-intercept of -3, and then it said, as for my y value, it said -1 e to the -12. All that means is -3, 0, and that's where it would be crossing the x-axis. So don't let that big E, don't let that confuse you. Just know that's what that means. Okay, and then just make sure, we kind of already saw one like this. The one before where we got 1.999999999, right? Just go ahead and round that up to 2. Now, if we have a solid decimal like 1.5, then you can leave that at 1.5, or you could get that to a fraction. So just use what you already know about numbers, and use a little bit of common sense there as well. Okay, so that should cover it. And I hope that you learned how to graph these in your calculator. Remember that I'm giving you a handout of exactly how to do these in your calculator, even though it says it also on your notes.